They thought denying a man his rightful place would go unnoticed. At Gate 47, an airline agent named Linda Pierce dismissed Elijah Carter with a cold glance and a silent judgment. She saw a black man in a tailored suit and decided he didn't belong among the privileged few in first class. But when they picked Elijah Carter, they didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know Elijah was the CEO of Apex Dynamics, a leader whose reach extended far beyond the walls of that airport. What came next wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning that shook the entire airline industry to its knees. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Outside Gate 47, the sky had begun to dim. The last golden rays of sunlight spilled onto the tarmac, casting long, defiant shadows across the motionless planes. Inside, a storm of consequences was gathering. Quiet, certain, and unstoppable. The line at Gate 47 buzzed with a low murmur of boarding calls and restless travelers. Beneath the fluorescent airport lights, Elijah Carter adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit, the sheen of his polished shoes reflecting the sterile floor. In his hand, a first-class boarding pass, indisputable proof of his place on that plane. He approached the counter with a quiet confidence earned from decades of navigating rooms where his presence was often questioned before his credentials were. "Sir, I'm sorry," the gate agent said sharply, without meeting his eyes. She slid his boarding pass back across the counter like it was something contaminated. "You won't be able to board this flight." A pause, the kind that cracks the air open, leaving only the raw silence of disbelief. Elijah blinked. "There must be a mistake," he said, voice even. "This is my confirmed seat." Around them, conversations stalled. A few first-class passengers stole glances. One woman whispered behind a manicured hand. A man smirked as if enjoying a private joke. Somewhere behind Elijah, a phone camera clicked, capturing the moment, framing it before truth could even defend itself. Was it the color of his skin, the subtle judgment in their eyes? He had seen it before. In boardrooms, in negotiations, in elevators where people clutched their purses tighter. But here, at an airport gate, ticket in hand, it stung sharper. How many times must a man prove he belongs? The agent's face remained an unreadable mask. "There's an issue with your reservation," she repeated. Elijah stood frozen for a heartbeat, the weight of 1,000 silent battles pressing down. Then, with the practiced patience of a man who knew when to speak and when to move mountains, he took a slow breath. What would you have done in his place? Swallowed the insult for the sake of convenience, or stood firm for your dignity? In that quiet moment, Elijah made a choice. A storm was coming, and it would not be contained. Elijah steadied himself, stepping back from the counter as the gate agent busied herself with the next passenger, a middle-aged man in wrinkled khakis and a faded golf polo. The man offered a brief nod to the agent, who smiled warmly, scanning his ticket without hesitation. "Welcome to first class, Mr. Donnelly," she said, her tone suddenly light, almost conspiratorial. The boarding pass beeped, approved. Elijah felt the sting sharpen in his chest, as if the rejection were being carved deeper by the ease with which others were accepted. His hands curled slightly at his sides, not in anger, but in restraint. He stepped forward again. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," he said, each word precise, unwavering. Minutes later, a woman in a dark blazer appeared, her expression already rehearsed into one of professional indifference. "Sir, unfortunately, we're unable to verify your reservation at this time," she said, almost singing the script she'd likely memorized for moments like this. Another supervisor came. Same words, same hollow eyes. Somewhere to his left, a young flight attendant leaned in toward a colleague, not realizing Elijah could hear. "Maybe if he dressed a little less expensive," she whispered. The words struck like a whip, casual, cutting, and layered with something uglier than simple mistake. It wasn't about a seat. It wasn't about a reservation error. It was about an unspoken message. You don't belong here, no matter what you wear. Have you ever been somewhere you earned your place, yet still found yourself unwelcome? Elijah's heart thudded, not from fear, but from clarity. He realized this wasn't just a personal slight. It was part of something larger, older, insidious. And this time, he wasn't walking away. The overhead announcements buzzed, calling boarding groups like nothing had happened. But Elijah Carter, standing silent and still amid the rush of moving bodies, was already rewriting the script they thought they could force upon him. Sometimes the smallest moments hold the power to unravel the largest injustices. Elijah Carter closed his eyes for a brief second, feeling the noise of the terminal dissolve into a low, humming void. He slipped his hand into the inner pocket of his blazer, pulling out his phone, sleek, black, and pulsing with quiet power. With deliberate precision, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he'd hoped he wouldn't have to use. He tapped it. It rang once, twice. A calm voice answered, crisp and ready. "This is Apex Legal." Why? Elijah didn't hesitate. "Execute Plan B." 2 words, no more. He ended the call and stood still, like a man watching the first cloud of a brewing storm. No shouting, no demands. Just a waiting, simmering certainty that the weight of truth was already moving toward them like a rising tide. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. Phones buzzed in pockets, laptops flipped open. A low ripple of murmurs moved through the gate area. One by one, passengers stared at their screens, their faces morphing from boredom to disbelief. Apex Dynamics had posted on every major platform. Their CEO, Elijah Carter, was denied boarding first class today due to system errors. Interestingly, our AI just uncovered over 2,500 open discrimination lawsuits tied to this airline. Curious? Let's investigate further. The post exploded, thousands of shares in minutes, trending across continents. Elijah watched the gate agents huddle like startled birds, whispers growing frantic. A nearby passenger turned his phone toward Elijah, eyes wide with a silent message. "I see you." Have you ever witnessed a moment when silence breaks and justice starts to roar? For Elijah, there was no satisfaction, yet. Only a deep, still ache, knowing this was bigger than him, bigger than one flight. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The machine they had built to shut doors would now be forced to open them. Under the cold, clear gaze of the world, the first cracks appeared in the form of confused announcements. Flight delays, gate changes, apologies muttered over the intercom like prayers. Yet the real tremors were happening beyond the walls of the airport, where Apex Dynamics' post had detonated across social media, pulling thousands, then millions into the unfolding storm. Screens in the terminal, once looping commercials for luxury vacations, now flickered with news alerts. Breaking: major airline faces allegations of systemic discrimination. Elijah Carter stood motionless, hands clasped loosely in front of him. He didn't need to shout. The truth was shouting for him now. The airline's PR department moved like a flailing animal caught in a snare. Tweets poured out. "We are aware of the situation. There has been a misunderstanding. We deeply value diversity." But each attempt to spin the story only tightened the noose. Stocks began to tremble, shedding points like leaves in a sudden storm. Passengers who had once looked away now turned openly, phones raised, capturing every frantic gesture at the gate. Some approached Elijah with nods of respect, small acknowledgments of the battle unfolding in plain sight. How often do we see injustice with our own eyes, yet choose silence over action? An hour later, another bombshell dropped. Apex's legal team filed an emergency injunction against the airline, grounding every single one of their flights pending a full investigation into racial bias in ticketing and seating practices. The announcement hit the airport like a thunderclap. Screens blinked red. Flights canceled, canceled, canceled. Elijah let out a slow breath, feeling not triumph but a grave, steady vindication. This was never about revenge. It was about truth pulling off its disguise and forcing the world to look, really look, at the stains it preferred to ignore. Sometimes it only takes one man refusing to bow for the ground beneath injustice to crack wide open. The call came through just as Elijah was watching another wave of passengers storm the customer service desk, faces tight with anger and confusion. His phone vibrated against his palm, and for a fleeting second, he almost didn't answer. But he knew who it would be. He knew what desperation sounded like. He pressed the phone to his ear. A breathless voice, tinged with panic. "Mr. Carter, this is Daniel Reeves, CEO of Atlantic Air. Please, we need to talk." Elijah didn't move, didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch, thick and uncomfortable. "You're ruining us," Reeves finally blurted out, his composure crumbling with every word. "Our stock's in free fall. Our board is threatening action. Please, let's fix this. We can make it right." Elisha turned toward the terminal windows, watching the sun sink low over the tarmac, casting long shadows across the silent plains. He thought of every door slammed in his face over the years, every polite dismissal, every moment his excellence had been second-guessed. He lifted the phone again, voice even, sharp as a blade. "No," he said, "you ruined yourselves. Have you ever faced a moment when someone's regret comes too late to matter?" The weight of those words hung between them, final and immovable. On the other end, Reeves stammered something, an offer, a plea, but Elijah ended the call with a quiet tap, severing the line like cutting a rotten branch from a tree. By the time Elijah turned back to the gate, the landscape had changed. Atlantic Air's official social media accounts were issuing apologies faster than people could read them. News outlets reported mass firings within the airline's leadership, whispers of new policies, mandatory diversity audits, full overhauls of internal culture, all seeded into the headlines within hours. But Elijah Carter knew better. Real change didn't happen through fear alone. Real change demanded reflection, demanded courage. And as he watched the sky darken into a heavy twilight, he wondered, would they finally learn, or just build better walls? As the last flickers of daylight surrendered to the coming night, Elisha Carter stepped away from the chaos of Gate 47. An unmarked black car awaited him at the curb, the driver offering a crisp nod of respect as he opened the door. No apologies, no justifications, just quiet acknowledgement. Elijah slid into the back seat, the door clicking shut like the closing of an old chapter. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving behind the stunned terminal, the broken airline, and the headlines that still crackled across the world. Minutes later, they pulled up beside a sleek private jet, parked under floodlights that bathed it in an almost celestial glow. On the side of the fuselage, simple and proud, the Apex Dynamics logo gleamed, a phoenix rising. Elijah climbed the steps slowly, every footfall a reclaiming of something stolen long ago. Inside, the cabin smelled of leather and ambition. A steward welcomed him with a soft, "Good evening, Mr. Carter," and a glass of aged whiskey waited at his seat. Elijah settled in, the hum of the engines beginning to rise beneath him. As the jet lifted off, breaking through the heavy clouds, he pressed his forehead lightly against the window, staring at the glittering city shrinking below. Have you ever felt the weight of injustice fall away, leaving only the air of a freedom you built yourself? He took a slow sip of whiskey, letting the burn settle in his chest, grounding him. He wasn't naive enough to think this was the end. Systems didn't crumble overnight. Some would simply rebrand, repaint, and rebuild their barriers with smoother edges. But something had shifted. A message had been sent, not just to Atlantic Air, but to every room, every gate, every institution that still thought dignity was negotiable. Above the clouds, where the world's noise faded into nothing, Elijah Carter smiled to himself. This fight wasn't about seats or suits or flights. It was about something that could never again be denied. Weeks later, the airline once known as Atlantic Air unveiled its desperate attempt at resurrection. New colors, new logo, a glossy campaign built on slogans of fresh beginnings and inclusive skies. But those who had witnessed the truth, who had felt it reverberate through every canceled flight and every furious headline, knew the rebranding was only skin deep. They could change their name. They could not erase the memory. Elijah Carter, meanwhile, found himself thrust into a role larger than any corporate title, a living symbol of accountability, resilience, and the quiet power of standing one's ground. Invitations poured in, conferences, interviews, speaking engagements, but Elijah chose carefully. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in building spaces where men and women like him wouldn't have to fight for basic dignity. In one televised interview, when asked if he held anger toward Atlantic Air, Elijah simply smiled and said, "Anger burns quick and leaves ash. Change is what plants forests." Have you ever wondered whether you would choose vengeance or something far harder, forgiveness and vision? The camera captured that moment, a pause heavy with history, with loss, but also with hope. And aboard the Apex Dynamics jet, high above a world still learning how to reckon with itself, Elijah Carter sat by the window once again. He watched the stars wheel above the black velvet of the night, each one a stubborn spark refusing to be swallowed by darkness. He understood now that victory wasn't in shutting a company down. Victory was in every future traveler who would pass through an airport gate without being told, in word or in glance, that they didn't belong. As the engines whispered against the sky, Elijah whispered too, almost to himself. Next time they'll remember. And somewhere in the distant clouds, history shifted, because one man chose to stand when it would have been easier to simply sit. Sometimes, the battles we never wanted to fight choose us anyway. Elijah Carter didn't set out to become a symbol. He only asked for the respect he had earned. Yet through his quiet strength and unwavering dignity, he reminded the world of a truth we too often forget. Real change begins in the small moments, when we refuse to be diminished. It's easy to believe that age or circumstance might leave us powerless against injustice, but dignity has no expiration date. It lives in every decision to stand firm, to speak gently but clearly, to hold others and ourselves to a higher standard. Perhaps the greatest victories are not the loudest ones, but the ones that ripple quietly through the lives we touch, long after the moment has passed. In a world that sometimes seems eager to forget the lessons of respect and compassion, may we remember, one steady voice, one unwavering heart, can still light the way. The jet sliced through the night sky, and inside its cabin, Elijah Carter sat quietly, his reflection dim against the glass. No applause echoed in the silence. No cameras flashed, only the steady, unshakable peace of a man who had chosen to stand without needing permission. True power, he realized, was never loud. It was the quiet survival of dignity, even after every attempt to strip it away. In the days that followed, headlines would shift, policies would be rewritten, and an industry long shielded by habit would be forced to face itself. But the deeper work, the rebuilding of trust, the remembering of wounds not yet healed, would take time. And it would take all of us to ensure that what happened at Gate 47 would not be another story swallowed by forgetfulness. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.